This Future Cities Africa episode is with Dr. Jennifer Mirembe, Chair for the Education Committee at the Urban Design Institute of South Africa. We discuss urban designers towards healthy cities. Jennifer, welcome. It's great to have you on the show. Can you give us a brief introduction to your background, your current role, and why it is important?
We ensure that the public is aware of the Urban Design Institute and its role in future cities. The Urban Design Institute is actually a non government organization. It's composed of all the urban designers in South Africa. We keep a database so that the public knows that the quality of professionals that are actually trained, educated, and committed to designing cities. So we've got the database, we check the qualifications, and we ensure that everyone serving the public is actually professionally registered. Our head office is in Cape Town, but we have three regional offices in Durban, Gauteng, and Cape Town.
Who and what exactly falls under the term urban designers?
Urban designers are a specialty. The same way you see in medicine, we've got general practitioners, and then we have pediatricians, we have dentists, we have. So what happens in the built environment? We have architects. So after the architecture degree, the first degree as an architect, we begin to specialize. So urban design is one of the specialities of architecture. So you find that in South Africa, everyone who's an urban designer has done the Bachelor of Architecture degree. So we are two in one. We are architects, but we have specialized in urban design. Just in the same way you see doctors have specialized in gynecology, for instance. Yeah. So urban designers are architects who have specialized in designing space. And we mainly work in cities. Globally, it's usually called the space between buildings. We design the space between buildings. So wherever you see a building and there's space around it, the urban designers come in. It's quite interesting in cities because then you see that we design the parks, the taxi ranks, where people walk, where people cycle. We ensure that cities are safe, they're beautiful, they've got a branding. So that's what we do as urban designers. That's why we urban, like in cities, and then we are designers of cities, urban designers. But we are architects, but with a speciality.
Jennifer, what is meant by the term healthy cities? What is a healthy city?
Healthy cities is more of a phenomenon that came up. Cities around the world were taken off guard because suddenly we've got a pandemic. The whole world is under lockdown. Cities initially were designed for infrastructure and getting people around, just for transport or moving from one building to the next. And very few professionals considered health. The phenomenon that has come up a lot is urban health and healthy cities. Healthy cities are about turning the city around and designing a city based on health. So, health is the driver for the design of the city. Unlike in the past, where we design a city because we need economic growth, we need commerce, we need no. Now, since pandemic taught us, so we've turned this thing around. Cities now the campaign is to design cities based on health. For instance, according to the World Health Organization, actually, there's more about a healthy city. A healthy city should be able to promote physical health and mental health, meaning, how do you feel mentally when you go around your city? Can you get around? Do you feel safe? Do you acquire diseases because you live in a city? Those aspects of public health. How do you mix? How do you mingle? Remember when COVID came, we had to disperse. There was all that social distancing. Now, many cities had not planned for that. So now the whole Healthy City campaign is about ensuring that our cities accommodate the whole spacing and converging of people in a healthy way. Also, just to ensure that our cities are actually not the ingredients for spreading disease. And this is what COVID taught us. So the healthy city is about ensuring that the city in itself, by its infrastructure and design, is done in such a way that it does not multiply disease. For instance, if you find COVID was a good example, but we have others. We have TB, we have flus, we've got a lot of pollution, especially in our cities in South Africa. If you look at some of the skylands of Johannesburg, you see a whole layer of brown. Now, healthy cities is about changing the narration. So where we see that whole layer of brown, the pollution, the combustion, what we're saying is that if we can now plant more trees and introduce more systems, water, spaces in the city, such that we then the city creates more oxygen. Then so you see that the city itself is designed in such a way that its systems reduce disease, promote better health. There are some cities actually around the world which have now even introduced laws against unhealthy living. You cannot advertise junk food, for instance. Now, that's a healthy city, a city that ensures that its policies also guide the way people eat in the city. You find that I think cities, especially like in the Netherlands, you find that they are back to cycling. Now, that's healthy cities. So you find that the policies now are about reducing cars in the city, increasing cycling in the city, because it's all about health in the city, as opposed to the past where it was about how fast can you get around the city. No, healthy cities is about let's return to health.
Thank you for that explanation. What are currently making our cities unhealthy? What are some of the challenges in the way, and how can these challenges be overcome towards more healthier cities?
Allow me to focus on our big cities. Then you'll see that in our big cities, we have a very high rate of in migration, people coming into the city. Now, remember that the cities initially were designed for a certain amount of population. So, when you have a high influx of people coming into the city, some of them are unemployed, employed. So, you find that now our informal areas grow in number. So, because they've grown in number, they are overcrowded. The initial design did not design for that amount of people. Guess what? With overcrowding comes incubation of disease, comes explosion of disease. So you find that diseases like airborne diseases, you find that they actually incubate and grow in especially in our informal areas, overcrowdedness. If you look at the health profession, one of the things they're actually beginning to campaign for is for people in the built environment to begin to do more research on cities and buildings as social determinants of public health, because they want architects and urban designers to begin to think about how they actually design the buildings and the cities in such a way that they're not incubators of disease. The other aspect that makes our cities unhealthy is more the infrastructure and the use of the infrastructure. You find that while we have public open spaces that are supposed to serve as parks, we have the challenge of where now our public spaces are not safe. That's where some of our murders happen. Now, the role of public space is to create those building rooms where actually disease then does not incubate in the city. Now, if we do not use those public open spaces for places for people to gather in a way that is in a healthy way, then where do people gather? They gather back on the street. Now, how wide is the street? So you have more people packed and congested on the street, more than what was designed for initially, in addition to the combustion that's emitted by cars. So you have a million people on the street, lots of cars with the whole carbon dioxide emission. Guess what? Disease, airborne diseases. People are smoking, others are doing drugs. So you find that because the infrastructure is not expanding as fast as the in migration to cities, we end up with an unhealthy city. So, what can we do? What we can do is to just ensure a few things. Firstly, if we can look at some of our other cities that are developing around the world, how can we reduce the number of cars in the big cities? Because by doing that, we create more space for people to walk. So when we reduce the number of cars on the street, we reduce the number of carbon dioxide emission. We then create more oxygen because now we're opening up spaces, we're planting more trees, we're putting more fountains, we're creating more spaces for people to walk. We're expanding the pedestrian movement in the city. The other way I've mentioned earlier is where we look at cycling. Back to cycling, you find that cycling is not very common in our South African cities, right? So those are things we need to explore. How can we then create some streets just for bikes, right? How do we create some streets for bikes so that because bikes do not have as much carbon emission as cars do. The other aspect that we really want to consider is again the way we eat. We find that in our cities, especially our big cities, fast food is the way to go. We don't know uh, what's in this fast food. Now, if you've got a whole street full of fast food and nothing about healthy living, healthy food, intoxicated food, then guess what? That's how we then begin to incubate unhealthy living in our cities. So maybe we want to borrow some of the policies that are happening around the world, where in some cities you're not allowed to actually advertise for junk food. Food must be healthy, it must be fresh, it must be pro whatever our dietitians have said. That's the type of food that's promoted. Less oil, less junk in our bodies, and then more exercise, more spaces for people to walk, more cycling, less cars, less carbon emission. And then also the way we beautify our cities, more green, more trees, more fountains, more waterways. I think in South Africa, one of the leading cities on that is Cape Town. So you see a lot of integration of the whole green system, how that connects to the sea, the mountain, the walking areas. In fact, in Cape Town, you find that there are quite a few streets where it's now more pedestrian rest than car systems. So those are some of the ways in which we can begin to shift from the cities we have to healthy cities. The other aspect, Dan, about healthy cities is the way cities promote innovation. I think in South Africa, we're quite fortunate because in our cities, we have free Wi Fi. It's very easy to walk through Pretoria, for instance, and you're using free Wi Fi. Now, it is through the free Wi Fi that we become innovative and then we come up with better ways in which the city becomes innovative in itself. Remember, when the city is innovative, then people have more opportunities to grow their financial position, and then we have better health. So you can see that there are quite a number of strings in which we can convert our cities to healthy cities.
Jennifer, do you have some examples of cities that are currently getting it right with regards to moving towards a healthier city?
We have different types of examples. In in Africa, the humor in Africa is that sometimes the system uh, sorts itself out. For instance, if you go and visit Kampala, you find that it's easier to get around the city on bike than by car because there's so many cars in the city now. So people in Kampala have resorted to bikes. So subconsciously, you see that the city of Kampala is now more healthy because there's just no space for cars. You cannot get around Kampala in a car. You need to hop onto a bike. You find that now, subconsciously, the city is switching from motorized transport to non motorized transport. The other examples, maybe around the world, I just want to highlight is a city like Berlin. They're now implementing policies where they are reducing the number of cars that are allowed on any particular street because of carbon emission. The other one is Paris. You find that now the buses that are driving in Paris are non-petrol buses. I'm not saying that we need to copy, but these are just some of the examples because you find that um, all our buses and all our cars are still, apart from a few electric cars, all our cars are still carbon emission, carbon dioxide emission. So a good example is Paris now. All the buses, it's literally phased out. The use of petrol in a car, the use of petrol in a bus and public transport, it's phased out. All because by 2030, Paris needs to ensure that there is net zero carbon emission in the city. Now, in South Africa, I will highlight the city of Cape Town, for instance. You find that because urban design is very strong in Cape Town, partly because of the history, it was the architects in Cape Town that came with the skills, I think many, many years ago, came with the skills of urban design and then set up the school at University of Cape Town. Hence, urban design picked up very strongly in Cape Town right from the 1970s. So you find that the principle of connecting water to the green system in Cape Town was emphasized much earlier on. So you find that all the circles, if you look at the map, the aerial photograph, you'll see that there's water going through the city, there's water connecting, and then there are green spaces. The public areas where people sit, where they walk, the taxi systems, the markets, you see there's a very clear system of greening. So Cape Town is a very good example that has also made it's in the process of making that switch. So you find that much as we have carbon emission, we have also a very strong oxygen emission in Cape Town. Then you find that our other cities, for example, Johannesburg and Pretoria, because we now have the public bus system, you find that because now more people are beginning to switch from private vehicle to the bus system. So you find that slowly by slowly there are less cars that are actually getting onto the road because it's faster to get around Johannesburg by bus. It's faster to get from Pretoria to Johannesburg by train, for instance. So slowly by slowly we're beginning to pick out some of those elements of reducing carbon emission, increasing a more healthier air in our cities.
Linking urban design with public health. How exactly does urban design affect public health?
So urban design affects public health in a few ways because urban design is exactly that. It's about design. So and public health is about disease. So the first thing that urban design does is to ensure that diseases do not spread in the city. For example, you find that because we deliberately create open spaces in the city, you find that airborne diseases like tuberculosis, pandemics are more contained. They're contained in such a way that we give them breathing space to not to affect people because we have more because urban designers design cities in such a way that there's more open space and that open space is of quality. There are trees in there, the sitting areas, activity areas. It's intentional. There's water, there's vehicle movement is contained, it's constrained to the edges. So you find that because urban design ensures that the cities are people based, so you find that the incubators of disease are automatically eliminated. We've reduced the carbon emission, we've reduced the overcrowdedness, we've reduced the the whole system where, for instance, if a city is not intentionally designed by urban designers, you find that even spaces where, for instance, sanitation, disposable areas for rubbish, all these things are not deliberately put in their places. So what urban design does, it ensures that sanitation is in its place, water is in its place, green systems are in their place, places of where rubbish is disposed of is in its place, places where people gather and their activities are in their place. So you find that it's very difficult for disease to spread. So you see that urban design in itself has intentionally healed the people living in the city. What urban design does, because we are designers, we reduce the incidence of the spread of communicable diseases. So you find that because the best example is some of our designs, you see evidence in the city of Cape Town. You'll see that where the taxi ranks are compared to where activities are, compared to where the markets are designed. Where do people arrive? Where do people sit? Where do the market dwellers sell? Everything is intentional. So by making activities intentional, it's very difficult for disease to incubate and sell. So urban design in itself controls the spread of disease in cities. The other way urban design contributes to healthy cities and makes sure that cities are pro health is by ensuring that we put policies in place for designers. For instance, you find that it's now compulsory for anyone involved in urban design to show how they have connected the public areas with a green system. Green systems promote oxygen production. So Through urban design, we are intentional about the health profile of the people in the city.
Jennifer, in closing, what is your vision for the future of cities and how do we get there?
Our intention for the future of cities is twofold. Firstly, to ensure that we control the vehicles, the number of cars that we have in cities. So we are ensuring that a lot of our streets and public areas actually reduce the number of cars coming into our cities. We envision a future where we actually have policies in place that close off a number of roads to cars. So a number of streets, it's you'll see for example in Cape Town, you'll see some of the streets when we have events, we actually close off the cities to cars. So what urban design sees in the future is that we have that as more compulsory and normal. So more streets in our big cities where cars are not allowed and only people are allowed. Because when we do that, then we know that there's some streets that are clearly pro people and pro health. In the future, we also hope to influence the Department of Health and other sectors that are involved in the policies regarding food in the city. We hope to see that we can have some streets where it's purely healthy living and not promoting the normal junk food. We also hope to see a future where we return cycling to the city. For example, and what happens now is that you see that a lot of our cycling events happen on weekends, and so we close off a lot of our streets and the CBD towards cars. That's very common in Pretoria. If you come to Pretoria on weekends, you find that the rest of the streets are actually closed off to cars when we have cycling events. Now, this happens only on a monthly basis or once in a while. We want to see a future where we actually have some of the streets in our central business districts closed off to cars, and then we have more cycling coming into the city. We also want to promote cycling as normal. Cycling shouldn't be seen as something that doesn't happen in big cities. No. If you are moving between buildings that are walkable, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, then we want to see a future for our cities where we have introduced more cycling. We also want to encourage a lot of our landlords and people who own buildings in the city to introduce green systems, green walling, green roofs, green terraces, water walls, water areas, fountains, the whole two layers, green and blue systems in the city. You see that in Pretoria, some of us are buildings like in the main area, we have some of the green walling systems coming out there, but we want to see that no more in a lot of our buildings in the city. Because when we have green walls, green roof terraces, then you see we are actually reducing the carbon emission and increasing the oxygen emission. So Dan, those are some of the areas where we see quick wins in the future of our cities towards healthy living. Now, when it comes to overcrowded areas, we hope that we can have a campaign where we sensitize people about the risks of living in overcrowded areas and what they can do to remain healthy. So in overcrowded areas, we want to encourage people to do small activities. For instance, urban gardening. Just by many people in the informal areas, just introducing urban gardening, you find that again, we are reducing um, disease incubation and spread and increasing oxygen production. Therefore, you can see that even in overcrowdedness, we can control public health. So that's the future we see, Dan. On a closing note, we would like to encourage professionals in the built environment to consider joining the Urban Design Institute. If you're an architect and you're in practice and you are involved in designing in cities, we'd like to encourage you to join the Urban Design Institute of South Africa. Join the other professionals so that we have a common school of thought, a common body, and a common standard for ensuring that our future cities are healthy. There's a whole system of urban health, and our people living in cities are also living in a very healthy way.
A big thank you to Dr. Jennifer Mirembe for this insightful conversation on urban designers towards healthy cities.